Chapter 19. Baker. Sitting in the living room with my aunt and uncle and the CM was more than a little awkward. I only lasted 5 minutes before I made some excuse and headed into the kitchen to see Puffer. He was watching an old rerun quiz show in the corner of the kitchen while he peeled potatoes. He looked over and nodded at me like he'd expected me. Maybe he had. Would the CM call first? I should have. Why didn't I think of those things? I'd never felt entirely comfortable with my aunt and uncle, but Sebastian never had a problem with them. Puffer, do you know if any of my dad's stuff is here? He scratched his chin with the end of his peeler. Yeah, some of your parents' things were left here, boxes in the garage. Why don't you go out, check it? While the CM's entertaining your aunt and uncle. He got up and tucked his peeler into his white apron pocket, then led me out the kitchen door to the enormous garage almost as big as the house. Inside it was empty besides a few cars, but there were stacks of boxes that looked out of place in the otherwise tidy space. Thanks, Puffer. I gave him a shaky smile. He nodded, then hesitated, gesturing towards my arm and its bandage. What happened to you? I hesitated, then shrugged. My butcher bit me. He raised his gray eyebrows. Did he now? If it starts hurting, let me know, and I'll put something on it. He turned and headed out, leaving me alone. Thanks, Puffer, I called. K-12. He raised his hand but didn't turn. I knelt down on the cement floor and went through the first box. It took me a long time to sort things. There were pictures and papers, school reports and letters from people I didn't know. Was sitting there, piles around me, sniffling as I stared at a picture of my parents beside the pool, her laughing, him looking serious, but I could see the smile in his eyes. He was such a butcher, serious but kind like Orion. Had he ever bit my mother? Not anywhere I could see it. They'd been extremely happy together. Could I be like that with Orion? He wasn't a retired butcher. He was the butcher. Still, I'd never felt like that before, that good and complete and blissful. No, we couldn't let that happen again. Violetta, the CM would like to have a word with you. I looked up at my uncle, Vincent, but before I could get up, the CM came into the garage smiling calmly when he saw me sniffling over old photos. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need to get back. Your uncle will bring you back when you're ready to return, or you can stay the night and return in the morning. I smiled. Thanks. You don't need to worry about me. He raised his eyebrows. I don't? That's not what your brother tells me, or anyone else for that matter. I can't think of anyone who thinks I shouldn't worry about you constantly. That sounds exhausting. He laughed. Not at all. I always worry about everything. That's my job. It sounds like a terrible job. He shook his head. There are benefits. Like what? He thought for a moment. I'm not sure, but there must be some. Have a good evening. He turned and left me shaking my head. He was almost funny sometimes. I went through box after box, but I didn't find anything to clue me in on why my parents would give money to some renegade leader who may or may not have been Olivia's brother, Lance. I did, however, find a folder labeled First Municipal Courthouse, and when I opened it, I stared at it for a long time before the words made any sense. Legal adoption for my father, Joseph Tancetta. Was he adopted? No, not at that date 18 years ago. Then I found our names, mine and my brother's. Violetta Cesario Tancetta. I read the papers over and over while my fingers felt numb. This wasn't what I was looking for. I didn't want to see that kind. A thing didn't need to. I stumbled to my feet, leaving the mess of papers in my wake. I walked out of the garage, along the well-lit path, feeling numb and blank. It was too much. I walked into Puffer's kitchen and started baking, throwing things together. Without any idea what I was doing, not focusing on anything, and the resulting mess was so strange looking. I almost dumped the entire pan of odd-shaped biscuits into the garbage, but Puffer stopped me. I'll take those, Miss Tancetta. Why don't you go to bed? You've had a long day. Landry called, and he's making certain we'll be well guarded through the night. You're safe here. I stared at Puffer, at his bright blue eyes. Landry. His eyes were pale green like my brother's eyes, like mine, and my mother had interned with him 19 years ago if she'd helped with Orion's conception. Landry, who was overprotective and strangely fatherly. Maybe not so strangely. Landry, who was the greatest baker ever, my birth father. I sat down on a kitchen chair and stared at my hands, my strong hands, and sensibly short nails. I needed to see Orion. I couldn't go back to Candlestick Manor, not until I'd figured this whole thing out. My dad was my dad. He'd always been nothing besides the perfect father. Not that he didn't get cranky and short-tempered sometimes, but he was always my dad. I swallowed down thickness in my throat and took a deep breath. I stood up, smiled at Puffer, and headed to the guest bedroom. I unwrapped the blue men's pajamas and dressed, then lay in my bed staring at the ceiling. The last time I'd been there, I'd been idiotically giddy about my and Orion's first kiss. Now I had his first bite. I touched my arm, and for a moment the aching confusion vanished beneath a wash of perfect happiness, but it didn't last, and it shouldn't. I closed my eyes, determined to rest, but I spent a restless night, getting up around 4 a.m. and pulling out my phone. I needed to talk to Orion. I called him, curled up in the guest bed, listening to it ring. The voice that answered, instead of filling me with happiness and relief, put me on edge. Vanilla, what do you want? Armand, why do you have Orion's phone? At the moment I'm more fun, hard as that is to imagine. He's curled up in a fetal ball crying. That was impossible. Orion didn't cry or fear or anything like that. You're lying. He laughed, a short bark. It's his first vision. Those take it out of us. You should probably bake something particularly nice for him. What vision? Butchers have visions? Like of the future? No, butchers don't have visions. CMs have visions. You're saying that Orion is a CM? I thought a CM was in charge of a district with butchers under him. Armand, you're not making any sense. Am I supposed to? A CM is a CM with or without a district, like a butcher is a butcher with or without a district, or a CM. As for not having butchers, you should tell your brother that Orion's not his CM, because he acts like it. He's circling Orion like a puppy with its dead mother, and there's nothing to kill, so he hasn't got any distractions. It's very funny. That doesn't sound very funny. I have a sick sense of humor, he assured me. Look, Armand, are you serious about something being wrong with Orion? Yes, Vanilla. Oh, your brother would like to chat. Vi, where are you? What are you doing? You need to come bake for him. No. Armand, we shouldn't move him until he feels better. She should come here. What are you doing? Don't throw holy water on him. The phone clicked off and I was left to stare at the phone. I almost called back, but I wasn't sure if I could deal with Orion if he wasn't completely fine. I couldn't deal with Armand or my brother, not when I could barely deal with my own bones. I swung my legs out of bed and dressed quickly, calling a cab because I had to get back to Candlestick, but I wasn't going to wake anyone. I needn't have bothered. When I came downstairs, my Uncle Vincent was sitting in an armchair at the bottom of the stairs, reading a newspaper. He looked up and nodded. I'll get the car. You can grab breakfast. He got up and walked out a side door that led to the garage while I stared at him. I sighed and called to cancel the cab. It was just as well. I had a lot of questions, but I wasn't sure if I had the stomach for the answers. I went into the kitchen and made some toast and eggs, then looked up to see my uncle in the doorway, his neat slacks and button-down beneath a sweeping long coat I'd never seen him wear before. No, maybe he'd been wearing it at the butcher's feast, but this was different. This was him ready to kill vampires and zombies to keep me safe. Do you think this will be dangerous? He glanced down at the coat a bit self-consciously. I don't think so, but it never hurts to be prepared. He smiled at me. I'm very happy that you and your brother have found a place. I smiled sickly and followed him out to the car that was running in front of the steps. He followed the circular drive to the gate, which opened automatically. Then he pulled out quickly onto the deserted road. The drive was 20 minutes. I sat in the passenger's seat, clutching my phone, staring at it, trying to convince myself that Orion would be fine. Are you all right? My uncle asked. What's the difference between a CM and a butcher? Have you ever had a vision? He glanced at me, his eyes clear, focused, and completely not confused. He reminded me of my father. He would explain this. Some butchers gain some attributes that make it likely that they'll transition into a CM, but it's a difficult process, in its way as hard as becoming a butcher. The attributes you must have are connection, emotion, and most of all feeling. Most butchers never develop any of those, which makes them excellent butchers but not able to understand the bigger picture and make connections between what would otherwise be simply black and white. That's what the CM does. He sees more understands more, and relates to everyone on their level. He understands the darkness in a way a butcher never could. I nodded and swallowed thickly. So, if Orion's having visions, that means he's transitioning into a CM? Does that mean he's going to get sick, lose his hair like Sebastian? He shook his head. No, it's not a physical change but mental, emotional, psychological. His world will be turned inside out. He'll become for some time very different from the butcher you knew. I swallowed. I needed Orion unchanged, constant, my butcher. So he won't be a butcher anymore. He shook his head. He won't actually stop being a butcher, those skills are with him whatever else happens, it's just that he'll become more as well. I'm not surprised to hear this. The CM wouldn't have sent Orion on a diplomatic mission to werewolves and vampires if he wasn't capable of seeing more than the average butcher. And the butchers, Armand and Sebastian, are more energy and capacity than one CM can manage. Yes, I can see that it's time for Orion to become a CM. He'll be even better than his father. I nodded and smiled, but I couldn't say anything. How could I say anything? The CM still had his baker, Landry, but wouldn't things be different? We still hadn't figured out the whole coma biting thing, and this thing, and my dad not being my dad thing, it was too much to deal with in too short an amount of time. And if Orion's transition made him go crazy for a little while, what could I do to help? I'd have to be strong and pulled together to make up for whatever weakness he had. I took a deep breath and sat up a little bit straighter. It was going to be fine. Everything was going to be just fine. When we pulled up to Candlestick, the gates opened immediately, but I didn't feel quite like I was coming home. I shifted, unable to relax when I'd have to see Landry. Maybe there was another explanation, but of course there couldn't be, not with my eyes. I said goodbye and headed inside like I belonged there, but I didn't quite feel like it. The house was busy even at that hour, butchers whispering, buzzing as they walked with purpose down the stone halls. I tried not to make eye contact as I headed straight for the kitchen. So what? If Landry was my genetic father? It didn't change anything. I was still my dad's daughter and Orion's baker, and that meant I had to learn what a baker could do to help a transitioning CM. I walked into the kitchen and the 15 bakers gathered stopped talking as soon as I came in. I smiled at the ones who met my eyes and smiled, but Puffer wasn't there. Of course not, I'd just come from his house. I forced myself to smile at Landry and walk over to him. What's going on? He hesitated before he took my arm and drew me to the side. I didn't expect you back so early. There have been some developments. What kind of developments? He frowned fiercely. The butcher found a baker last night in Northside. Found him decomposing, another baker said helpfully, his arms crossed firmly over his chest. We've examined the body and there's no doubt but that he was killed by energy. I stared at the black-eyed baker I'd never seen before. He was a little leaner, meaner, and younger than most. Probably closer to Landry's age, maybe. Even a bit younger. How could he be killed by energy? Landry cleared his throat. You know that I've told you that you can drain a vampire stopping it, but sometimes if the energy is too evil, corrupted, strong, the dark-eyed guy said, cutting off Landry. His accent was rhythmic, slurred. I've seen it before, in Europe where the really old things sleep. I swallowed hard. So sometimes taking energy will kill you? Maybe it's not such a great defense after all. Landry shrugged and pulled out a knife, pressing it into my hand. There's always the old-fashioned way. The bakers nodded and there were some hears. I stared at the knife, the handle perfectly formed to my hand. It wasn't very large but looked extremely sharp. I don't know how to use a knife. We'll have to fix that, love. Landry grinned at me and my heart twisted in my chest a little bit. Was he my dad? I needed to bake for Orion, but the kitchen felt too close, too stuffy with all the bakers, and I had to do something to stretch my body and think. When things got to be too much, too stressful, I'd either play the violin or do gymnastics. I made my excuses and went up to my room. I pulled on my leotard with a sweater and sweats over it and headed down to the gym. No one was in the enormous box of a room, ropes dangling from the ceiling for climbing, mats on the floor for wrestling. I moved the mats into a row that covered from one wall to the other. I let my subconscious process everything while my body moved. I stood at one end of the room and let everything else fall away other than my breathing. Steady in and out as I stretched. I pictured in my mind the perfect routine. The round-off double-back handspring to back aerial. Not terribly complicated, but it would do for a warm-up. It was a pity they didn't have uneven bars in here. That was my most difficult event and therefore the best. When trying to not think, I shook my head. No thoughts allowed other than my breathing, my heart pounding, my perfect routine. I took off, flying over the stretch of mats before I dove into the round-off, my arms strong, the impact and recoil perfect. I knew that it would be a perfect routine, and it was my body flowing through each movement as if I'd done this yesterday. I landed after the final back aerial and walked to the end of the mat to turn and begin again. I did the same routine half a dozen times before I was warm and needed something more challenging. For an hour I forgot about everything besides my body, but then I was tired. My arms as rubbery as my legs. I was out of shape. I grabbed a mat and dragged it back to its place, moving slow. I needed water, needed Orion. I shook my head and went back for another mat, then stopped staring at Casper the butcher, who was carrying 3 mats on his head and looking ridiculous. He grinned and winked at me but didn't say anything as he passed me with his mutts. I went and got another one, but I dragged it and was moving even more slowly. It was lucky that Casper had come along and was bored enough to want to help. Maybe. I finished and went to my stuff, pulling on my soft pink pants and sweatshirt, cute ones that didn't make me look like my brother. Casper came over and walked with me towards the door. "You're amazing," he said with another suggestive smile. "Thanks. I've been practicing for a long time." He nodded and laughed like I'd said something particularly witty and brilliant. "I can tell. Do you want to get out of here for a few hours? Everything's crazy right now with the dead baker and everything with the butcher." "Thanks, but I've got to get back to the kitchen." He nodded but grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "I understand that. You should know that Orion's not the only butcher." I looked down at his hand, then up at him. He was really good looking, but his energy was off, not solid the way Orion and even Armin's was. "I do know that. If you're looking for a baker, you should look elsewhere. There are other bakers." He laughed, but instead of pulling his hand away, his fingers tightened, digging into my skin. It hurt, but I didn't think he meant to be rough. He was just strong and forgot himself. Orion never forgot to be careful with me, well, when he wasn't biting me anyway. "I've never seen a baker as pretty as you, or as talented. You're one in a million, Violetta." "You can call me Miss Tansetta," I said, my voice hard. "And you can take your hand off me." He frowned and would have said something, but a figure stepped into the room, wearing a long cloak, hair loose around his face, soft silken strands contrasting with his angular cheekbones. "The lady asked you to take your hand off of her." Orion's voice was soft, but oh so deadly. Casper's hand fell from me and he took 2 steps away, staring at Orion with a strange expression, not fear exactly, more like awe and respect. "Orion, you're on your feet. It's good to see you. I was just trying to entertain the baker while you were out." "No need to explain," Orion said in that low voice that sent a shiver through me. I crossed my arms so I wouldn't run and throw myself at him. We had a lot of things to figure out. Orion met my eyes and my heart stopped, then restarted pounding frantically in my chest. His eyes were full of so much that I couldn't understand, but he still looked at me with the burning intensity he'd had in the kitchen before he'd bitten me. "Orion," I said, feeling kind of shy when he didn't come closer but stayed near the door. "Are you okay?" He nodded and finally started walking towards me. "Miss Tansetta, I think we've approached this the wrong way." I nodded slowly. "What do you suggest we do? You bite me and then I put you in a coma." He almost smiled, but he only shook his head. He didn't say anything else until he was closer, 3 feet between us. Where he stopped, like that was close enough. My skin prickled from not having him in my arms, touching him, feeling him around me. I gripped my arms and forced a bright smile. "Miss Tansetta, I think that we should stop taking these pointless risks. I've allowed my feelings, my selfishness to get in the way of reason and rationality. There's no sense continuing like a couple of stupid teenagers with no grasp of consequences." I swallowed hard. "Stop? You mean stop kissing?" He stared at me, his eyes bright and filled with a brimming agony that didn't touch his voice. He smiled slightly. "I mean stop all contact, at least until I gain more control over my instincts. I won't see you again until further notice." "Until further notice? You sound like the utilities company." I guess that's right. You're going to shut off my power, leave me in the dark, but I see your point. Are you doing okay? I called this morning and Armand answered. He's a fun person to talk to. Said that you had a vision. Orion took a step away from me. It's nothing that you need to worry about. I took a step after him. I couldn't help myself. And yet I find myself worrying. Just tell me that you're fine so I can sleep tonight not wondering if you're having some kind of mental breakdown. He frowned as if puzzled. A mental breakdown? Is that what Armand said I was having? No. I just realized that there are more important things in this world than what I want, how I feel. Violetta, I think you should take some time far away from here. You could use a vacation, I'm sure, and there are places that the darkness rarely touches. I stared at him. I should go on vacation? Well, that sounds fun. Well, it would. If it didn't sound even more like exile. Are you kicking me out of here? Are you going to make me beg Armand to let me stay with him? He exhaled a sigh. Of course not. You can do whatever you like and you are always welcome at Candlestick. I was only suggesting that you might prefer to spend time somewhere else over the holidays. I put my hands on my hips. Yeah? Would it make you uncomfortable having your ex-girlfriend around? His lips tightened. I don't think of it like that. Why not? We were together and now you're dumping me because I might put you in a coma. While your reasons are completely legitimate, this isn't the best timing. You see, I've just realized that. I bit off my words and stared at him. I'm not very good at this breaking up thing. Apparently I need more practice. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to burst into tears or punch you in the face or knife you. Landry gave me a knife. You'd think it was pretty. I ran a hand through my hair. I don't understand. I mean, I do understand because you're using logic, and I really do understand logic, but it's the first time that logic has come up in this alternate universe I fell into in September. Wow, Orion being rational instead of talking about magic muffins. Think I'm going to faint or puke. Are you all right? Maybe you need some water. I took a deep breath and stared at him. Are you serious about not wanting to see me anymore, or is it part of your mental breakdown? He spoke carefully, clearly. I'm not having a mental breakdown, I'm only experiencing clarity. I never should have drawn you into this world. You would be much happier without me, without any of this. You never asked for it, never wanted it, and now you're in danger. I stared at him. Because of the missing baker? The bakers all say that he died taking too much of the wrong kind of energy. He frowned at me. Did they? That's interesting. I wrinkled my nose. Is it? Wow, your new enlightened mindset is pretty sick. Just as well you don't want anything to do with me. I stared at him. He stared back, unmoving. I took a step closer and he stepped away. I stopped. He stopped. Was this real? I just gotten used to the idea of Orion liking me, loving me, and now this? I should go, he said. I rolled my eyes. If you don't want to see me, and since I live here, you probably should. Maybe your dad won't want me to stay here now that I'm not your special friend. You can always stay with your aunt and uncle if it gets uncomfortable here. For you. I gritted my teeth. I know that I can go there. I just got back from spending the night. I shook my head and walked past him, aware that he stepped back so I wouldn't accidentally brush against him as I headed for the door. Where are you going? He asked. None of your business, I answered. Where was I going? No idea, but at that moment it didn't really seem to matter. I was wearing jogging clothes, not really warm enough for the weather, but running seemed like a good idea. I hit an exterior door and took off my sneakers, much better than house slippers for covering distance. I ran until I couldn't run anymore and instead walked along, glancing back to see two butchers tailing me. Did Orion send them after me? Orion. Tears welled in my eyes and I took the next corner left, headed southeast towards the cemetery. It would be more rational to cry there. Took a long time to walk, jog to the cemetery, probably 2 hours since Candlestick was nowhere near it and I was moving really slow. I walked up the gravel road between rows of headstones towards the corner where my parents were laid. My mother. Why hadn't she told me that Landry was my father, that he was the best baker in the world, that I would have these talents, these abilities and compulsions that I needed to learn to control? She told me exactly nothing, and now that's what I had, nothing. I stood in front of her grave, then stared at my dad's, then at hers before I finally sat down, pulling my knees up and letting the tears fall. Honestly, nothing made sense if Orion didn't want me. This world, butchers, bakers, none of it meant anything without him. He was my rock, the center that kept everything orbiting instead of crashing down. Without his weight, his magnitude in my life, I would be nothing but a falling star or a rock. Whatever. I sat there shivering, crying, feeling like everything was so much more than wrong when someone came and stood beside me. I knew by the scuffed boots that it was not Orion. I knew by the energy I could feel even at that distance who it was before he opened his mouth. Vanilla, you're going to get a cold, and then Landry will make you drink bland soup and vile concoctions to teach you to stay healthy next time. He sighed and dropped a heavy coat over my shoulders, warm from him. Put my arms in the sleeves and wrapped it around me, not worrying about the dirt. Armand never worried about dirt that I could tell. Thanks. You've been here for hours. Your guard detail is getting bored and hungry. I shrugged. I didn't ask them to come. No? I'll have them go then. They can come back after they've eaten. He turned and motioned to the other butchers before turning back to me. Should we raise a tent here so that you can spend the rest of your days in communion with the dead? Or shall we go somewhere a little bit warmer? I looked up at him. Orion doesn't want to see me anymore. He cursed low and slow but didn't look surprised. Well, that explains why. You want to catch a pneumonia. That'll make him feel bad. I made a face at him. I'm not here to make him feel bad. I'm here because I feel bad. I feel terrible. I found out today that my dad isn't really my dad. He blinked at me. Yeah? The eyes were kind of a dead giveaway. I scowled at him. You knew? This whole time you knew and didn't say anything. I hit his shin, which hurt a lot. I pulled my throbbing hand against my chest and stared at the cold gray stone. I never doubted that my dad was my dad. He was always there for me while I never heard mention of Landry my whole life. If he was important to my mother, you'd think she would have said something. He sat down like that was an invitation. It wasn't. Look, Vanilla, Landry's a good baker, a great baker, but he's not the kind of person I'd marry. Your dad was. Your mother picked the guy who would be a better father and who she probably liked better, even if he wasn't the one who actually did the impregnating. She chose him, he chose you, and you're glad he was your dad. Right. But Landry doesn't treat me like some random girl. He's always been extra nice to me, and when I think of him letting me suck out Orion's life because he was more concerned about me than him, I feel sick. But if he does care, why didn't he ever see me or try to connect before now? Why didn't he say anything when he met me? Armand shrugged, the movement brushing against me and giving me a little bit of energy. I needed energy so much. Orion, not this idiot. All the same, I leaned my head on his shoulder so my forehead touched his neck. The steady flow of energy began immediately, filling me with his strength plus a few odd bursts that I tried to ignore. He doesn't want to scare you away. You're kind of delicate, you know. They're a bunch of monster fighting machines and you're a fluffy little cupcake that runs away and cries at the cemetery anytime something bad happens. They don't want you to run away and get gobbled up by something that relishes cupcakes. Like you. Do you have to put your cold nose on my neck? I pulled away. Sorry. I didn't ask you if I could. He shrugged. I'll let you know if it bothers me. I frowned at him. No kidding. It kind of hurts my feelings. See? You have feelings. What are those? Butchers don't even know. And you don't even know what butchers don't know, so why are you the one they sent to check on me? He studied me. You're my baker. I'm not a butcher, but somehow we connected. So I'm responsible for your well-being. I started laughing. You're responsible for my well-being? I fell on my back, laughing so hard. Oh, you're going to make me so happy. Yeah, that's going to happen. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt, but then my heart hurt and I was going to throw up or cry or something. I stared up at Armand. I could only see his profile as he stared at the gravestone. It's ridiculous, I know, Vanilla, but ridiculous or not, I need to keep you from getting ripped apart by darkness or causing self-harm when your heart breaks, that kind of thing. Did Landry send you? He shook his head. Sebastian called me. He's also responsible for you, but he still hates it when you take his energy, and he hates seeing you cry, hates seeing you hurt. And you don't mind. He shrugged. Not particularly. Pain is one of the beautiful things about being alive. I sniffed and put my head back on his shoulder, making sure I pressed my cold nose in the fold of his neck. Enjoy the pain, Armand. Enjoy the pain. He laughed. Oh, I do, Vanilla. I'll even enjoy Orion's pain a little bit. Chapter 20. Butcher. She has a cold, but she's fine. Not that you asked, because of course you don't care about your cream puff. I was lying on the couch staring at the ceiling, and no, I hadn't asked Armand, who had no business being in the black box, which was filled with papers that kept piling higher and higher and higher. I couldn't seem to focus on them. I kept thinking of that last cream puff, the one that had saved Anthony, brought him back to himself when nothing else could have cured him. Now he was in the deep dungeon of Candlestick, so no one knew that he wasn't dead. 1. More proof that Violetta was the most brilliant baker the world had ever seen. One more reason for the monster in the darkness to destroy her. I sighed. If you're going to be here, then play for me. That should send him running. I was surprised to hear the sounds of his violin a few moments later. I closed my eyes and pretended that Violetta was the one testing the strings, tuning them, her hand drawing the bow across the strings, but Armand hadn't played for years, and he was terrible. Not only was he terrible, he played some horrible rendition of a pop love song I'd heard on the radio. I didn't complain. For some reason, listening to Armand play soothed some part of me that had been screaming ever since the night I'd found the dead baker. I closed my eyes and dreamed of Violetta, looking up at me beneath her dark lashes, soft lips parted, waiting for me, her smile and the last look on her face, shock and pain, but so much less than she'd feel later. I sighed heavily when Armand stopped, and my own agony renewed in earnest. Play on. He ignored me, sitting next to me and taking a paper, glanced at it, then tossed it back down. Violetta is staying at her uncle's house. She's realized that Landry is her father. That wasn't the best day for you to announce that you didn't love her anymore. I frowned at him. I never said that I didn't love her. She said that you didn't want her. I didn't say that. I said that I'd realized it wasn't going to work. He laughed. You think that you said that? What you actually said was that you don't really love her because her lines aren't good enough for you, and that if she really was as amazing as everyone said she was, you'd at least want her to be your baker. You also told her that she's not as pretty as Olivia, and not as interesting as all the other bakers. I made a dismissive sound. That's ridiculous. Oh, sure, but she had no perspective on any of this. She doesn't know how rare it is for a butcher to feel desire, to feel weakness and fear, and what it does to a man. She doesn't know how truly adorable she is. It's probably good that you dumped her so that she can go out with a normal civilian, find out how lovely she is. A normal civilian couldn't possibly understand how exquisite she is. He shrugged. No, probably not, but she doesn't need another butcher, not after you tore her heart out. I closed my eyes and shook my head, leaning back. All of my actions were for her safety and happiness. Whatever. I'm here to talk about the vampire. I opened one eye. What about her? I want her. What would you do with a vampire like Voltaire? He shrugged. The CM obviously isn't going to execute her, so he may as well release her. She could be useful. So tell the CM that. I did. He insisted that I talk to you. I think he wants me to irritate you so much that you get off the couch down here. You haven't gone hunting since that night. I shrug. You and Sebastian seem to have a handle on it. But we're not attuned like you. We wouldn't have found the baker. I sighed. Maybe I'm worried what else I'll find if I start looking. He nodded. To be perfectly honest, you're taking it rather well. I frowned at him. Thank you. What are you talking about? Your transition to CM. You know how most of them go crazy, run away from all butchers, ask the local pack leader to infect them, join a nudist colony. Actually, that one makes sense. I stared at him, sitting up slowly until I was close enough to throttle him with my bare hands. Somehow I resisted the impulse. You got infected after you had a vision. He hesitated, then nodded. Something like that. I didn't realize that the visions aren't real. Of course the visions aren't real. All the millions of ways I could destroy Violetta couldn't possibly all come true. You should have known that. The Sam explained it to us. He stared at me for a long time. Right, so because I allowed fear to control me, I must be much more idiotic than you, who are letting fear control you. It's not controlling me. I'm simply seeing the dangers and making certain that the worst ones don't happen. He laughed. You have no idea what the worst things are that could happen. Me choosing fear opened the door to things that I'd never imagined but were everything I was trying to prevent. You're acting in fear and hurting your sweet baker. It's stupid. I sighed. I don't expect you to understand me, Armand. I don't either, but acting out of fear is something I understand intimately. I know that my words aren't going to change your behavior. I just want to be able to say, I told you so, when you realize that the nightmare you thought you were preventing is only the tip of the iceberg. I closed my eyes, heart throbbing. That's the stupidest reason I've ever heard for becoming a werewolf. He laughed. The fear is extremely stupidifying. I won't argue with you there. Well, I guess I'll go see Violetta, see if she's still sick, let her take my energy and make me depressed biscuits, and then take her to the Greek for a haircut. Maybe he'll try to date her. That would be amusing. I shook my head. As bad as it would be for Violetta to be with a bogeyman, at least he would keep her safe, not bite her, and not drag her into the middle of a butcher war. Who knew war would have so much paperwork? Some senior butchers came in with more papers, and when I gestured them to put it down on the already teetering stacks, one of them shook his head. Sir, you need to eat. I stared at him. Don't I? You've been down here for 4 days. The younger butchers are worried. I considered that, then moved, grabbing him and pulling him into a headlock. While disarming the other one, I hissed into his ear. Are you my mother that you should be concerned about what I eat? Your duty is to fight the darkness, not show concern for me. Tonight I will lead you north and you will remember what you are and where your duty lies. I released them, stepping back and glowering at them. You may go. They turned and disappeared, leaving me in a room with a lot of other butchers, who were steadily ignoring my little outburst. It was one thing to have tantrums with the CM, but to show my own men my insecurities and weakness was unforgivable. I inhaled deeply before nodding at a butcher a year younger than myself. Bring me dinner and a basket of baked goods. He took off at a run while I settled down, determined to get through at least enough of this mess to know where in the world I was going to take the healthy group of butchers sure to shadow me. They didn't want me to faint in the middle of a battle again with no one but Sebastian to drag me to safety. They were worried about me. I had to shake off this lethargy and focus, but I kept seeing Violetta's face, hurt, and then the fear would encapsulate my heart. Ignored it. If I could ignore race who were nibbling on my joints, I could ignore the fear at least long enough to organize this mess. Hours later, I'd forced myself to eat Landry's goods, as nourishing as usual, and completely tasteless to me. I needed Violetta. I did not need Violetta, because I couldn't have her. I couldn't need what I couldn't have. I was doing fine without her. Not fine exactly, but I could blame that on the vision, the transition. Armand was right. I'd heard the stories of butchers who transitioned badly. Me spending a few days on the couch was hardly a sign of imminent madness and failure. I put on my coat and checked my knives, noticing that I hadn't cleaned one of them since the night I'd found the dead baker. The steel was corroded from the residual blood and gore. I sighed and put that down. I'd have to take it to the armory, maybe smelt it down. I'd do that later after I got back from this trip, which was bound to be disappointing. I didn't feel the darkness stirring. I didn't feel anything except fear. I walked out into the courtyard behind the garage, my body heavy and numb. Flexed my fingers and walked into the crowd of butchers gathered there, waiting for me. Where to tonight, butcher? Sebastian asked, like I came out to lead them. Every night. Everyone was breathlessly silent, waiting for me to say something profound. North. They nodded and began moving like that wasn't the most obvious statement known to man. We walked, spreading out a block long, 2 blocks, thinning out as we walked through the city from Calder to downtown, then north, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like north was too obvious. Something pulled me east towards the river. Not north at all. We walked and walked until I started to feel nervous. They were all following me and I had no idea where I was going. I'd never had this uncertainty as a butcher before. I'd always known where I was going and went there unerringly. One way or another I found what I was looking for, but this was different. This was me taking stacks and stacks of papers that I'd barely glanced at before tossing aside into random piles. At least they seemed random, but maybe my subconscious was working on them at some level. One could hope. I walked down narrow alleys lined with chain-link fences, garbage gusting around in the darkness. It was strangely devoid of monsters. Continued on for an hour, up and down the narrow streets, turning around and heading back. Seemingly randomly, I turned a corner of a large abandoned building that ended in a dead end. A figure was pressed against the brick wall, hair scraggly and eyes wild. Knew that face and my own heart constricted as I gestured my hand out for the butchers behind to fall into position. Soundlessly they spread out, ready to take out this butcher, but we would take him alive. From the looks of him, it wouldn't do much good. I pulled out my phone. Landry, is there anything of Violetta's left? He was quiet for a moment. Puffer sent over some terrible biscuits a few days ago. Never seen anything like that. Perfect. We'll be there in a few minutes. I closed the phone and moved towards the now crouching and snarling butcher. I'd never be able to forgive myself for sending him undercover if I couldn't bring him back. Violetta's strange biscuits had to be what I needed. She always gave me exactly what I needed and a little bit more. I held my hand up, holding the butcher's back. Sebastian edged too close before I gave him a sharp look and he fell away. Lee, I'm glad I found you. I was wondering if you could explain the last report you handed in. You mentioned something about a safe house that got overrun on 6th Street, but I don't recall having a safe house there. Why don't you explain that to me? Maybe show me where it is. He lunged towards me, snarling like an animal. I suppose that makes sense. Did you ever eat at that new Italian place? We could stop on the way. He hesitated at the mention of food. He'd always been a connoisseur of Italian restaurants. Some of the butchers were kind of snobbish about noodles. Tossed a Landry biscuit to him and he caught it, immediately stuffing it into his mouth. He was beyond hungry. Where had the baker been kept before he was killed? I needed to have more conversations with the renegade butchers in Calder's basement. How often were they fed? How much and what quality? So many questions I should have had before this moment. It's not as good as Riva's on the hill, but I've heard good things about their sandwiches. I threw him another roll and he caught it and ate it, tiny bit slower than before. How did you find me? He growled. Words. This was progress. I threw him another roll and he ate still. Suspicious and paranoid, but not completely out of his mind. I didn't. We're just out enjoying an evening stroll by the river. It's so quiet down here. Relaxing. I can see why you like it. He laughed, harsh and horrible. I like it? I'm trapped here. I've been trapped here for years. So the vampire was in his head, but in a new and special way. I'd have to bring the biscuits here. I held up my hand. 1 minute, Lee, I have to talk to Sebastian about his girlfriend. He's dating Olivia. Can you imagine the stress he's under? I walked over to Sebastian, gesturing him close. Orion, what about Olivia? You need to sweet talk her. Also, can you run down to Candlestick and bring back Violetta's biscuits? Be very fast. Good boy. I patted his shoulder and sent him running while I watched him for a long moment before turning back to Lee. I walked close, not too close, and threw him more bread. Have you tried fishing in the river? I asked companionably. The Sim wants to take me fishing next summer. I can't even imagine what that would be like. Butcher, you need to get out of here. His voice was low, urgent, and completely terrified. I waved his concern away. I haven't left Calder for days. It's good for me to get out and stretch my legs. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. He shook his head, eyes going wild again. You have to leave before he finds you. Don't worry about it, I said, steel in my voice that made him flinch. Relaxed and smiled at him before I continued persuasively. We'll talk about that later. Right now let's talk about fishing. Have you ever fished before? He shook his head, concern warring with frustration. Butcher, fishing doesn't matter. You need to understand the danger. But maybe I do understand the danger. I'm supposed to be the butcher. After all, maybe what I need to understand is fishing. Tell me what you know about fishing, Butcher. Don't leave anything out. I threw him another roll, and he ate it, staring at me in consternation before he began to tell me what he knew about the history of fishing. He was a good butcher, following orders without questioning things too much. If he talked about fishing, he wouldn't talk about whatever would trigger the same meltdown Anthony'd had. Now, Anthony was sane, but he didn't remember much about the last 6 months. If the monster had left the same trails of chaos in this butcher's mind, I could hope for a few minutes of rational information before he broke down. If I had Violetta's goods with me, I wouldn't have to go through this, but the risk of losing all information was worth the hope that he could be brought back into the light. I kept him talking about fishing for a long time. The butchers around me shifted. This had to be the strangest and most boring hunting expedition they'd ever been on, as he chatted about fly fishing versus bait fishing, and apparently he actually had experience in the sport. I thought about where I would put a baker if I were bent on destroying my kind but still had the needs of my kind and liked to eat werewolves. That part still made no sense. It took Sebastian over half an hour to come back with the biscuits. He tossed them to me and I ran forward, butchers around me pinning Lee down while I forced the strange biscuit in his mouth. He gagged, fought, and it was nice to have Sebastian take the brunt of his attack while I focused on keeping his mouth full. He had to eat. I wouldn't lose this butcher the way I'd lost that one girl to the vampires. His teeth were sharp, good for biting biscuits and butchers. My teeth in Violetta's skin. Only a moment the memory went through me, but it was enough to knock me back. I kept staggering back until I came up against the wall, the need for Violetta rushing through me, more powerful than 1,000 waves. I needed her, but I couldn't have her. I needed her. I had her biscuits in my hand. What if the biscuits didn't work because I'd shut her out? What if I lost this butcher because of my fear for her? I stared at Lee where he struggled beneath a pile of butchers and shook my head. One life wasn't supposed to be above the greater good, but Violetta's life was above that of any other butcher who trusted me. If a few butchers fell because she wasn't beside me, that was nothing as long as she was safe. That wasn't a healthy attitude for a butcher to have. I tucked the biscuits away without eating one. I went over to Lee and took his face in my hand, staring into his eyes. Lee, report your findings on your mission to infiltrate the renegades, discover the leader and spy out their position and intent. He blinked a few times, trying to focus, spitting out some crumbs, but hopefully there was enough biscuit in there to do the job, that of keeping him alive no matter what he said. Orion, you're in danger. Be specific. He's coming for you. He wants to rip out your heart. He hates you. I smiled. The feeling is mutual. What will he do? He frowned and shook his head. I don't know. He needs a baker. He wants the one who saved the werewolves. I knew Bubber the baker. I had to dump his body where he wouldn't be found. You weren't supposed to find it. He's angry. I nodded. I'm sure he is. How many bakers does he have? He shook his head. I don't know. 3 of them use me for energy. I don't know where he keeps them. They move around all the time, guarded by the ones who feed them, but the bakers, most of them think they're working for the right side. He gets in your head until you forget who you are and what your purpose is. I nodded and started to get nervous. He should be convulsing by now unless this was something different. I didn't want something different. I handed him another one of Violetta's biscuits. Eat this. You probably won't want to. He ate it, holding his eyes tightly closed while he forced it down. No, he didn't like it. That was probably a good sign. Unless it wasn't. I wanted to eat those biscuits, take the crumbs off his lips and devour them. Orion, you need to take the butchers away before he comes. He'll destroy all of you. Here. I glanced around at my butchers, at 23 of them, a very good number. If you counted me and brought it up to 24. Well, I can't say that. I dislike that. I've been having a lot of self-doubts recently. All of this standing around is really dull. That's when I heard it, felt it, the shift as darkness grew around us and then fell from the sky. Zombies, vampires and werewolves crashed through the windows of the building, rising around us, falling down like ripe rain. I cut my way to the exit with Lee, holding him under my arm to shield him from the once human debris. The butchers roared as they cleaved rotted flesh from desiccated limb. I cut through monsters as they fell, filling the narrow space impressively. Whoever this monster was, he knew how to get the darkness to join their forces. It was ridiculous. I could barely move and more kept falling on top of us until we were literally swimming through bodies. It seemed likely that this butcher was a trap, but who laid a trap that they didn't spring for 45 minutes? Had the monster taken the time to gather up this army of undead and decomposing in the hope that we'd still be around by the time they were lined up and ready to crash through the windows? Interesting. It showed a love of the dramatic, the impression that this beautiful mess couldn't help but inspire. I should have been terrified, but apparently the fear didn't apply to me personally, but to Violetta. The monster was here. He wouldn't be hurting her. I handed Lee another biscuit and continued through the horde. determined to make it to the alley exit with him before he went under. He had been under a great deal of strain. A few biscuits might keep him alive and even bring back his sanity, but they wouldn't give him the real rest he needed. Also, I needed the descriptions of the bakers and information on where they'd met Lee. He had to have some clues in his brain that I could uncover. Howling echoed to me, a howl like nothing I'd ever heard before. The werewolf was outlined against the night sky at the top of a lower building beyond the end of the alley where we nobly struggled. Armand. For a moment I thought he'd come alone, but then other figures crowded around him and then he leapt down, vanishing from sight for a moment, but the sound he made when he met the crowd of undead was unmistakable. That was the sound of a butcher. He'd been wearing the coat, the one from Odin. Maybe that's what inspired Armand's fighting style, but I couldn't help but think it was more likely Violetta's baking. A good coat could only do so much. Violetta. I needed her. If Armand, werewolf, could give her energy and eat her biscuits, surely I could do the same if I were careful. I didn't have the power to send her away, not that she would be any safer somewhere other than Candlestick. She wasn't at Candlestick, but at the Vespedes. A good number of butchers were patrolling the area. I'd seen to that in spite of my ennui. Lee fought, but we were barely holding our own when Armand's troops rushed in, a hairy army that ripped apart the darkness like it was tissue paper. Those dogs moved as one, directed by Armand, who hadn't shifted as he fought, even though his eyes gleamed bright gold. A butcher's scream pierced the night, a war cry of course, and I found Sebastian beside me, a wild look in his pale green eyes as he swept his knife in a deadly arc, evisceration and decapitation in every stroke. We need to get you out. What I really need is an umbrella. I smiled slightly as I ducked and lunged, parrying and then striking out. I did not kill any slower than Tancetta, but he was certainly more flashy, large and quick, fierce and seemingly reckless, but with instincts as sharp as any butcher I'd seen. I walked towards the alley's entrance with the assurance that my butchers would join me. I was almost there when a figure fell from the sky, larger, darker, and with burning red eyes that I didn't dare look straight at. Vampire. Maybe. How had a butcher been changed into a vampire, and why would that make him eat werewolves? He was mesmerizing to watch, every move a blend of skill and grace that made me want to throw my own weapons down in defeat. I could never be as good. Closed my eyes and flowed into the darkness and shadows, the hunger tugging at me, but not as strong as the tug towards Violetta. The monster was here. If I could slaughter him now, he would never threaten Violetta again. I forgot about Lee, leaving him behind as I faced the monster, drawing knives. As I cut through the zombies, spinning, ducking to get closer to him, he fought towards me, cutting down Armand's soldiers and my butchers with every stroke. It was difficult to kill butchers. I couldn't worry about those that fell. This was my chance to destroy him once and for all. Finally I met him, his movements a blur, but always my knife was there to block, my body twisting out of the way at the right angle in the right moment. He seemed so much larger than he was, all muscle and height, but up close he wasn't so huge, certainly no taller than Tancetta. Had he fallen? Fought. The smell of the monster rank and cloying, sweet almost like fresh meat, and an underlying stench of rot. The little butcher's all grown up, the monster hissed, his voice striking me like a blow, a vampire's voice that could render the reason from a mortal man. Happily my reason had fled from me the moment I told Violetta that I didn't want to see her again. Thank you, I said after I decided it may as well be a compliment. I slashed a knife at him, then had to backpedal to keep from his own slash. Couldn't see his face, not that I tried that hard. I didn't want to meet those eyes. You're going to die here this night. I inhaled deeply, the sickening stench and the near river. It's a good night to die. And then your sweet baker will be unprotected. I stumbled back from his fierce swipe, stringy hair dangling in front of his face. He fought like a butcher, but more vicious, more quick, more everything. He probably could kill me. I didn't mind that, but Violetta, I could not leave her defenseless. I threw a ball of holy water at him, but he threw a fireball and they cancelled each other out nicely, except for the rush of steam that filled the air between us. I hadn't eaten Violetta's cooking in too long. I couldn't fight the forces of darkness that still fell from the sky, burying me beneath their weight along with this horrible monstrous creature whom I needed to send back to hell. I quieted my mind and let the movement come from inside, letting my body move in a flow as easy as drops of water rolling down a window. Every movement was an extension of my intention, my calm acceptance. Life would bring what it would. Fate, destiny, the will of God. I could not fight that, but I could fight my own fear, my own personal weakness. Suddenly it didn't seem that the night swam so thick with the darkness, and when Armand fell in beside me, lunging forward to snap at the monster's throat, I smiled. In only a few moments Sebastian was on my other side, the three of us untouchable, moving in perfect rhythm, led by me without the slightest doubt. The monster knew when the power shifted, when he understood that he would lose, and turned, disappearing into the darkness and leaving me with no particular target but lots of bodies. I lost myself to the hunger for a few moments, a few hours, some time that I forgot the aching in my heart, the fear. We'd come face to face with a monster who gobbled up werewolf villages, and we'd lived to tell the tale, but he'd gotten away. Afterwards, in the middle of the mess, I frowned at the biscuit in my hand. I'd given them to fallen butchers to help them recover, but this last one I couldn't quite give away. I had other things to do than think about a biscuit. But I couldn't help imagining her hands in this dough, her face angry and hurt when she pounded on it. I put it in my mouth and for a moment forgot everything as I tasted Violetta. Her energy, her life, her sweetness, but then bitterness and sorrow filled me with the depth of her suffering. She needed me, and I had abandoned her. I fell to my knees and another vision descended, of her lost and destroyed, without me to protect her, to keep her safe. Chapter 21. Baker. I blew my nose, washed my hands and continued to follow Puffer's precise directions for popovers. Did you put the pans in the oven already? He asked, frowning over my shoulder as I mixed the dough to a creamy consistency. Yes, sir. They're been preheated. I think we're ready to pour. Mix it hard now, until it's frothy while I fetch the tins. They'll puff a bit more that way. I nodded and whipped the mixture with the ancient whisk until small bubbles rose to the surface after each stir. I scooped the mixture into the pan. Quick, precise, in time to Puffer's nodding head. These had a few extra ingredients than the usual from Puffer's smaller store of weird stuff. He explained what each of them did and how things worked together to create other things. Zebra hoof powder, for instance, worked to rebuild blood cells, but if you added ostrich eggshell to it, you'd have a blood thinner that also increased heart rate and lessened pain. At the same time, he reminded me often that my instincts were always right. Whatever I knew, I had to follow my heart, which would lead me right. My heart was with Orion, so I only nodded and repeated in my mind the powders and their various uses. A sharp rapping came on the door. I looked up to see Armand standing outside, looking a bit more irritable than usual. I looked at Puffer and he gave me a sharp nod before he headed to the door, letting Armand inside and him out at the same time. Puffer didn't like Armand too well. You look better, Vanilla. I paused in rolling out dough to blow my nose, then washed my hands and continued. Thanks. Landry sent over some cold medicine, some soup, but I left it in the car. You're going to refuse it again, right? I frowned at the pale dough, creamy like Orion's skin. I crumpled it up and threw it down on the marble tabletop, turning to Armand. I've been thinking. He cocked his head. Is that strange for you? Orion asked me to be his baker, and I agreed, but now he doesn't want to kiss me or see me at all. I understand that he had some kind of vision or whatever, but wouldn't he still want me to be his baker? If he's going to be rational, he should be rational and insist that while there can be no affection shared, he needs me as his baker if he's going to be as strong as he needs to be to find and destroy my parents' killer. He went to the oven, peering through the glass door and sniffing. He's transitioning. He's not going to be rational. But that's what he used as an excuse to break up with me, rational logic. Can't argue against that because I'm not completely insane yet, but seriously, there's no reason for me not to be Orion's baker. Not unless I'm running away from him and this world, which I'm not. I gave him a pointed look. If you open up that door before they're ready, I will scalp you. So there's no reason for him not to be my butcher. Other than that, he's worried I'll kiss him and put him in another coma. He's not worried about that, he said, sniffing along the counter. Why not? That's rational. I told you he's not rational. He's afraid that he's going to hurt you, not the other way around. Also, he's thinking about the future, long-range outcomes, and he sees the two of you having children like your idiot brother, who almost died, watching them suffer, watching you suffer for them, that kind of thing. Don't you have anything that I can eat? I went to the fridge and slid a meat pie I probably dripped snot into the night before across the counter to him. I wouldn't tell Armand. Actually, maybe I would. You can have this, but I think I sneezed on it a few times. Also, maybe my runny nose got into the sauce. He took the meat pie and sat down, cutting it with one of his big knives and eating a big slice with his hands. Armand, you need to wash your hands first. He nodded and got up, washing his hands for a long time very thoroughly, before he came back to the table. Thank you. I gasped. You said thank you. I'm going to have to tell you to wash your hands more often. He ignored me, gobbling up the meat pie instead. After he'd eaten the entire thing, he leaned his elbows on the counter and blinked sleepily at me. So how? Are you going to get Orion to let you suck the life out of him again? Rationality isn't going to work. He's talked himself into thinking that you're happier without him. He cocked his head. He might be right. It's not easy to be with a butcher, particularly one that's transitioning. He's worse than a curmudgeon. He's a wan, pathetic, whiny, lazy weakling, laying around all the time, barely eating, barely sleeping, simply rolling around in his misery like he can't get enough of it. I sniffed and placed the dough in the pie pan. Armand, can you turn the oven down for me? 200 should do it. Don't open the door or I will chop off your fingers. If Orion was really that miserable, then I had to help him. He would hurt me. He wouldn't be nice to me anymore, so I couldn't go in with my heart on a platter for him to crush. I had to put Violetta away and go back to being my brother. If I were a boy, I could walk into Calder, go down to his man cave and grab him before he knew I was there. I could play the violin for him. I could listen to him talk about whatever bothered him, and I wouldn't be part of his problem, his worry. I inhaled deeply. Armand, what kind of clothing do male bakers wear? I mean, interns like me. He scratched his chin. He should probably shave at some point. He was so scruffy. White shirts, black pants, black suspenders, black shoes. What do you have in mind? I smiled at him and he smiled back. I could use a haircut. The Greek will have a lot of fun with this. I think he's missed you being in drag. And Casper might flirt with me a little bit less. He scowled. Casper? That's a butcher waiting for a girl to stab him through the heart. If you're going to play baker's boy, you should probably have some knife skills. I nodded and glanced at the timer. After this comes out, you can help me with that. I can. I shrugged. You did say that you're slightly responsible for me, didn't you? He grinned at me. To tell the truth, I'm slightly fond of your muffins. You have a new cut on your face. The other one on your cheek is healed, but that cut, I said, brushing my finger across his forehead, looks new and like it might get infected. I'm going to put some stuff on it. We'll see if I can. Remember Puffer's instructions. I made a paste, put it on his head while he stared at me, still seeming sleepy. If you're too tired to teach me how to knife someone, you can come back later. The alarm went off and I went to take the popovers out of the oven, taking them out carefully and putting a slit into the bottom for the steam to escape, as Puffer had instructed. Give me one of those and I'll teach you and let you suck the life out of me. Ooh, you know how to really make a bargain. All right. I tossed him a hot one and he caught it in his mouth, snapping it out of the air. Impressive. Come on. We'll spar in the garage. It's mostly empty. Armand got up close and personal, knocking me back until I stood my ground and twisted around him, pulling my knife. He sighed and fixed my hand, not talking a lot, just moving me in the right place. He didn't usually touch me, so it was a little bit weird, but if I were going to transform into Cesario, my male persona, weird was only the beginning. The Greek was delighted to help turn me back into a boy. Armand left me at his haircutting salon. Your hair was really getting some length, but this cut will be easier to wash. And where? Are you going to be a woman every once in a while or stay this Cesario from now on? I shook my head. From now on, at least around butchers. He beamed at me, his eyes bright with tears. That's so romantic, being with him as a man if he can't have you as a woman. I stared at him. It's not supposed to be romantic. Supposed to be practical. But what if he tries to kiss you? I shook my head firmly. We're not going there again, at least not until after this whole transition thing and he chooses to be with me. What I need to be is a baker to help him get through this whole thing. That's what he needs, not more complications. He sighed but nodded. By the time he finished with me, my hair was kind of Cool and not pretty. When Armand came in with the shopping bags, he grunted. And didn't even complain about having to shop. Why would he? It wasn't girls' clothes. I went into the cramped bathroom and back, ignoring the werewolves in the cage, the girl the same but the guy younger this time and kind of attractive if you like scruffy and toothy. I went in a girl with an edgy hairstyle and came out, bust-bound, clad in menswear. Armand had included a black baseball cap, so that went on top, and I looked like I was seriously ready to park cars. Yeah, I looked kind of like a valet in the white button-down and black pants. There were worse things to look like. He'd also gotten me a black backpack and a black coat. He'd really gone to town. The shoes were smaller than I was used to, since I'd stuffed Boss's old shoes with socks, but it was nice not to trip and it was great to have full-size pockets and everything. I walked out as a boy and the two werewolves stared at me like I was an alien. Okay, Baker, now you look natural, Armand said with a grin. Are you going to take my energy before you go back to Candlestick? I was a little bit nervous about seeing Landry again, but whatever. I grabbed the back of his neck and pulled his energy out of him. It would be faster with more contact. I reversed the cap and leaned my forehead against his neck, feeling his pulse race beneath the skin, smelling the wildness and warmth that was Armand, at least between the bursts of noxious energy that I dodged, at least metaphorically, psychically, something. I pulled away and nodded at him. Eat the popovers, I'm taking this with me to Candlestick. I'm going to need it. I headed out the back door, ignoring the shadows that moved around the edges of the yard. You think Landry's going to yell at you? I shrugged. I think that I'm going to yell at him. He chuckled. Really? That should be interesting. I didn't answer him as I walked towards the small hatchback. Vanilla, why don't we take the bike? I turned to Armand and saw him with a motorcycle, an enormous machine that was sleek metal and distressed leather. I walked around it half impressed, half terrified. It wasn't safe. But I wasn't scared, fluffy, delicate Violetta who Orion needed to protect. I was Cesario, tough Baker who could hold his own, or at least who would eventually. Sure. Armand climbed on the front and I hesitated before I straddled the thing, not touching Armand. How did guys ride on motorbikes together? When he took off, I grabbed him around the waist and held tight while he bumped over the yard, down the curb to the street. It was a little less wild on the pavement, but I still grabbed him a couple of times. It was freezing, but the coat was warm, and my old clothes in my backpack would pad me slightly if I fell off the back. At the same time, where were the helmets? If I fell, my head would crack like an egg. I grabbed onto Armand's waist and pressed my cheek to the back of his brown coat. He laughed and went faster like I was encouraging him. I closed my eyes and clung to him until we got off the highway and Armand finally slowed down. I sat up and gripped the seat behind me, determined not to act like a silly little girl. I was tough. So tough. I grabbed Armand around the throat and pulled the energy out of him. He gripped my hand as we coasted up to the gate and he parked with a jerk. You want the driver to pass out? I couldn't take that much energy unless I kissed you. You shouldn't have gone so fast, and you shouldn't drive without a helmet, and you should never let me go without a helmet. Are you crazy? No need to answer that. I swung off the motorcycle, gave him a short wave and headed to the gate. The guy in the gatehouse opened it for me, apparently a lone person on foot. Dressed like a baker wasn't all that threatening. I headed up the long winding drive wondering why Armand had taken me this way, instead of through the back, past the pond of purity. By the time I reached the curve that revealed the front porch, I saw Landry standing in the open doorway, large arms folded over his chest, the CM behind him leaning against the doorway. This was it then. I squared my shoulders and kept my hands down, calm, steady. I nodded to Landry and the CM. Hello. I'm Orion's Baker. You can call me Cesario. I don't want to be pampered and I don't want any nonsense. I'm here to do a job, so let me know what you need and I'll try to do it. They were blocking the doorway or I would have gone past them running away. Probably. As it was, I had to stand there while Landry's eyes narrowed. The CM smiled and held out his hand. Cesario, is it? Welcome to Candlestick Manor. Stay as long as you like. I shook his hand and since I was there I took his energy as much as I could pull out of him in 5 seconds. Not a lot, but more than usual. I would do this weird or not. Landry rolled his eyes. Cesario? That's my middle name. I raised my eyebrows. Probably because you're my biological father. Now that We got that out of the way, we don't need to talk about it again. The CM laughed, low and only for a moment, but it earned a scowl from Landry. He is very clear. He doesn't want any fuss, doesn't want any nonsense, only here to do a job. That's very commendable, Cesario. Please, come in. He stepped back, allowing me room to get around Landry. I walked directly to the kitchen, needing nothing from the CM and nothing from Landry unless he felt like teaching me something useful. I went to the flour bin, almost filled a bowl, then made a well and cracked 3 eggs into it. What was I making? No idea, but I had to make something, so I didn't freak out about Landry staring at me. I worked kneading dough and slicing meat off a goat, making a mess of it until Landry came over and told me what to do, not touching me and not talking about anything else. Focused. Until it was dinner and butcher's boys came in to take trays up to the butchers above. They were having a dinner apparently. I took a plate outside, wearing my new coat and sitting in the apple tree. While I ate, I saw Sebastian come out, heard him call me, but I waited until he was under me to call him. Look up, Ba. He looked up, grinning. You're back at Candlestick. That will take some pressure off the butchers, not have half of them patrolling the Vespetti's neighborhood. Why are you up in a tree? I climbed down, scrambling quickly, hesitating on a branch 8 feet off the ground before I did a double backflip dismount, landing perfectly. Show off. Fish face. Show me how to stab a butcher. I pulled out a knife I kept in my coat pocket and lunged at him. He had me disarmed in a matter of seconds, but he was laughing. I stomped his instep and brought my elbow back into his solar plexus, which made him laugh a little bit wheezier, but he was still laughing. Nice Vi.
Calme, Cesario.
He raised his eyebrows and then noticed what I had on, including my hat. Wait, you're dressing as a boy again? Hate to say it, Cesario, but everyone knows you're a girl. He handed me the knife and pulled out one of his own. I lunged at him, but he grabbed my wrist, twisting my knife back at me while his own knife came into my stomach. He'd somehow reversed it so the handle hit me instead of the blade, which left me gasping and clutching my stomach. It's not about being a boy, it's about being a baker. How many girl bakers are there? Hardly any. So I'm going to be a baker, sex not included. He snickered. If you say so. I'm not sure that Orion's going to buy it, though. I slammed my head into his stomach, knocking him back, knives forgotten. He laughed and rolled on top of me. He was too heavy. Not fair. I grabbed his face and sucked the life out of him, not fast enough, but someday I would knock him out, and then I'd be stuck under him. Him. I should think this through. Get off me, B. You're so heavy. Are your bones made of lead or what? Ugh. You eat too many magic muffins. He sank onto me even heavier. I bit him. He yelped and backed off, checking his arm where I bit him. I sat up, breathing hard, and grinned at him. What? Can't take a baker bite. He frowned at me and rubbed his arm. Are you going through some kind of hormonal imbalance or something? This isn't you dressing up like a boy. Fighting, what's going on? I stood, brushing off my pants. They brushed off really well. Nice. Not me is the point. I want you to take me to Calder. I'm going to see Orion. I have some baked goods to bring him. He frowned at me, still clutching his arm. Man, Caesar, I'm not sure he'll like that. I rolled my eyes. You're such a baby. I'm his baker. If he doesn't like it, he can tell me. No one needs to know that you're the one who brought me to Calder. He thought about it for a minute before he nodded. Okay. I wouldn't normally do this, you know. I'm not betraying him. I patted his head, but I had to reach up high to do it. Yeah, I know. You're in love with him. Let's go. I've got to get back early so I can go running. He scowled. Running? Why? That's not safe. I laughed. Because I'm out of shape. I have to be able to beat you up, little brother. I'd been born 23 minutes before him. He snorted but went with me to the garage and the little black car he seemed to have as part of his butcher's boy position. Nice ride, I said, adjusting the seat so it was reclined, and I splayed my legs out. He shook his head, glancing at me. Yeah, you know, I always thought you were a little strange, but this really proves it. How's Olivia? He was quiet for a minute. She's great. Like Orion, only a woman. He snorted. She's gotten a little bit weird lately, like when we're together. She'll want to hold hands and stare at me. It's kind of creepy. I sighed. I thought you liked her. I do. I mean, she's amazing, but she's kind of a lot. And when she's staring at me like that, I remember that I have a lot of other things to do. I studied him. How does she look at you? He shifted uneasily. I mean, I guess sort of like she loves me, which is crazy, but it's how it feels, and I'm not sure what to do. I can kiss her, but I don't know about the staring thing. I snickered. The look of love. So terrifying. You really are gutless. He frowned at me. It's not easy. I have all these duties more since the butcher found the dead baker, and I don't have time to figure out how she feels and how I feel and what this all means in the greater scheme of my existence. I just want to be a butcher and kill stuff. I try to tell her that, so she knows that I like her, but I'm not ready for the staring thing. But she's just like, I can be patient. This has to be so hard for you. And, yeah, but I don't think we're talking about the same things, and I don't know why she's not mad at me for not texting her enough or calling her or thinking about her all the time. I don't know. She expects so much usually. But now she doesn't. I'm worried. I sighed. Are you worried she'll take it to the next level, or that she'll dump you? My chest tightened at the reminder of being dumped, but I shook my head and focused on the now, on my brother. I didn't have a heart, I was Cesario, genderless baker. Genderless, loveless, with single-minded determination to bake the crap out of the world. That was me, and I liked it. I kind of don't know why she hasn't already. She's not desperate. There isn't a butcher who wouldn't fall all over himself to be with her, except the butcher, of course. Of course, I said blandly. He kept quiet for the rest of the ride, which meant that he was having second thoughts about this. The thing was, he knew perfectly well that if he didn't take me, I'd take a cab or walk, leaving me unprotected, and that wouldn't go over well. Still, he didn't feel good about it. I almost felt bad for making him worry about his precious Orion, but I got over it. He was my brother. He should beat Orion up for dumping me. I glared at him. You know that Orion dumped me the same day he told me he loved me. He glanced at me with wide eyes, pale green eyes like Landry. I looked out the window. Sorry, Cesario, but what do you expect me to do about it? I don't expect you to do anything about it. I don't need you or anyone else to rescue me, unless there are vampires or something. My point is that Orion's not the hero here. He's the idiot. And you're the idiot who's following the idiot, so stop looking at me like I'm a criminal. I'm not. I'm his baker, and he needs me, so if you really want to help him, you'll stop being afraid of making him mad at you. He sighed. Okay, V. I mean, Cesario. You're his baker. We don't have to talk about love or anything. He was quiet for a minute as he pulled up to Calder, sticking an identity card in the reader so the gate swung open for him. That really sucks, though. Stop here. I opened the door before he got to the garage. I got out and walked down the drive to the nearest side door into Calder. I pulled my cap down over my eyes and walked in boldly like I belonged there, a baker among butchers. I got attention, but honestly I don't think anyone really caught on to who I was, at least not until Francis saw me. His eyes widened and then he grinned fiercely as he fell in beside me. Tansetta. Francis. You're Sebastian today? I shook my head, stretching my legs to walk faster. If only all the butchers weren't so tall and long-legged. I really needed to go running. Cesario is the name I'm going by. I'm a baker. That's it. Ah, so you are here to see your butcher? Do you want me to lead the way? I shrugged. He's downstairs in the velvet room? I can find it myself. Thanks. I ignored him and the look he gave me, the amusement mixed with concern. Francis should be much more amused than concerned. That almost made me hesitate, but I wasn't about to let anything stop me, not when I'd already made myself ridiculous with the whole identity switch. I had to go through with it boldly, fearlessly, as stubborn as Orion when he stuck to not seeing me when he needed my baking. How would this work best? I'd run through several scenarios, but none of them were perfect, and all of them may lead to my personal humiliation. Didn't matter. There was no Violetta to be humiliated. I was Cesario Baker, extraordinaire, who brought werewolves back from the brink, and other things. Less impressive but still super important. I didn't let myself hesitate on the top step or the second or the other 15 steps until I reached the black velvet floor of the box. Butchers were around the edges, but there was no TV on, just a little bit of billiards beneath low lights and some murmured conversation. Orion was on the couch, one hand holding back his hair, the other holding a paper that he squinted at. No kidding, he should have a really good reading lamp if he was going to spend so much time down here. I walked behind him, keeping the right distance so he wouldn't feel my energy. About 5 feet. Seemed to do it. I picked up his dead brother's violin, rosined the bow, and plucked the strings. Armand, are you going to play another pop song? If you must. His voice was low, rich, sweet, and decadent. I almost dropped the violin and I held my breath as I stared at the back of his head, his fingers threading through his hair. He didn't look at me. A pop song? Armand, there was a song I'd done a floor routine to, not my usual fare but really bouncy and fun. Would he like that? I was Cesario, not Violetta. The butchers had put down their pool cues and were watching me, aware that I was not Armand or Sebastian. I played, angry and harsh, frustration flowing through my fingertips and turning the bouncy pop song into a flurry of wild notes that filled the room. I finished in a fierce sweeping bow and took it down, breathing hard. Armand, so much passion, you'd think your favorite band broke up. He turned his head and smiled at me. I scowled back. He gasped as his lips parted and he sat up, turning while his eyes grew dark. Hungry, top of the food chain kind of predator. I threw my new backpack at him, crossing my arms while I waited. He stared at me for a long time before he looked down. What's this? It's called a backpack. Open it. He stared at the backpack, his long fingers smoothing over the sturdy canvas, before he unzipped it, revealing a good portion of what I'd baked that morning. What is it? I have no idea. Eat it. He looked up at me, eyebrow raised. What makes you think that you can come here, order me around without any explanations? I crossed my arms and scowled at him. You asked me to be your baker. Phew. Want a new baker, fine, but until you do you have to trust me. He studied me, absently fingering a roll of some kind. I believe I asked you to give me space. I cocked my head. So bite me. You need a strong baker with a strong connection if you're going to find my parents' killer and destroy him. You can't do that if you're weak, if you refuse the strength that I can give you. He smiled, the most dangerous smile I'd ever seen. I should have been afraid. But the only thing I wondered was whether he would actually bite me or not. And if I refuse? I glared at him. I lead a revolution among the bakers. No bread for you or any of your kind. He smiled slightly. Really? Either I eat your baked goods or you go to war with me. I nodded. Also, you're going to give me your energy. I can't take care of this district if I don't have the butcher's strength. His face hardened. You're trying to control me. I'm not only going to try, I'm going to succeed. The bakers are the butchers. Weakness. You may be top of the food chain, but you can't live without us. Us or you. Do you think that I can't live without you? I rolled my eyes. Don't be so dramatic. I'm finished being a baker's girl. Like I'm finished dating you. Find another baker if you want. I don't care as long as he does the job, but I'm not going to let your personal emotions get in the way of logical outcomes. You'll eat my bread, I'll take your energy, and you'll hold back the darkness and find my parents' killer. He inhaled deeply and glanced down at the roll, bringing it unconsciously closer to his lips. And if I refuse, you'll destroy my world. I had no idea that you could be so persuasive, Violetta. Call me Cesario if you have to call me anything. We won't do a lot of talking. We won't be doing anything other than exchanging goods. He raised his eyebrows. Oh no, I couldn't possibly agree to that. You'll have to play for me twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I scowled at him. Why would I do that? I have things to do, important baker. Things that you wouldn't understand. He smiled sharply. Humor me. I'm transitioning into something delicate and needy. I require musical attention. I glanced over at the violin. It wouldn't hurt me to practice twice a week. Fine. Now eat. I have things to do. Yes, important baker things that I wouldn't understand. Be patient, Cesario. Did I get the name right? It suits you. Very imperial. How often will you bake? For me and require my energy. Daily would be ideal. Daily? And you would come to Calder every day to execute our exchange. I nodded firmly. Yes. That seems hardly fair. I'll be around the manor on weekends, and if you're here twice a week for my entertainment, that only leaves a few other days. I'm getting too sedentary. I'll see you at Candlestick. I wouldn't want to distract you from your important work. He laughed, the sound filling me with an ache that I tried to forget. That's true. My work is so important. In that case you can come Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and I'll see you the others in Candlestick Manor. Does that sound fair? I scowled my brother's most ferocious scowl. I don't care about fair, I only want to get this done. If you're finished figuring out the logistics, eat the bread. He raised an eyebrow. You're very insistent. Is this perhaps poisoned? I smiled tightly. I guess that's a risk you'll have to take. He laughed, a low growl that sent a shiver over my skin. Every day. Apparently. Very well, Cesario, my demanding baker. He raised the bread in salute, then swallowed it in 2 bites. I watched him, fascinated as he ate, eyes closed as though savoring every crumb, eating until the contents of the bag were completely empty. Was he actually going hungry? Didn't seem possible, but how else could he possibly have eaten so much? He opened his eyes and stared at me, the look one of such intensity and flickering emotions that I couldn't quite identify. And now, Cesario, will you take a humble butcher's energy? I cocked my head as I walked towards him, heart pounding. What humble butcher are we talking about? Humility isn't necessary, only docility. He laughed. Docility? I'm not sure I have that to offer. I sighed. Would you prefer I grab your face, neck, wrist, or something else? He stared at me. I would definitely prefer something else, but I will docilely accept your preference. I wanted to touch his face, but if I did, I would stroke his cheeks, maybe brush his lips with my fingers. That would be humiliating. I wasn't here with personal desire, but on business, baker business. Give me your hand. He obeyed, extending it behind the couch where he was still half reclined. He had the buttons on his shirt open down to his ribs so I could see the creamy skin, hard muscles beneath, and a sprinkling of soft hair. I focused on his hand, gripping his wrist with both hands so that he couldn't touch me. Closed my eyes and focused on taking his energy. It wasn't immediate but slow, painful as I struggled to hold back. There was so much waiting for me, an ocean of strength, life, happiness that I could take if I wanted, but I wasn't there for that. I drew in his strength drop by drop until I pulled away. Whatever I'd taken would be enough, because I knew somehow that if I took any more I'd find myself in his arms and never find my way out again. You aren't finished, he said, standing. He gripped the back of the couch, the muscles and veins standing out in his arm. I took the backpack out of his lap, zipped it up and tossed it over one shoulder. See you tomorrow, butcher. You didn't get anything, not a drop. You can't leave yet. I shrugged. You didn't specify how much energy I'd take. If you're going to bake anything worthwhile, you'll need more energy than that. I glanced at him over my shoulder. So make me some chocolate. You can send it to Candlestick. Like I said, if you don't like me, you can get another baker. I turned and marched resolutely out of the room, up the stairs, pulling my hat back down over my eyes and gripping the strap of the now empty bag. My stomach was on a roller coaster. Every step away from him in agony. Agony was good. Better than humiliation. And I'd gotten what I wanted without falling into his energy like an addict. I kept walking through the halls and out the front doors, but stopped abruptly when I realized that Landry stood in front of me, arms crossed, showing his massive forearms. I'll drive you back home. I hesitated because I wasn't sure where my home was, then nodded.